sugar getting out of control today. So I have soft and I have original, and these are batches we just tested, so we haven't even put labels on them yet. And let's see, I'm gonna give everyone a few minutes to get on. Here's my ugly glove box. I'm gonna get some gloves. So I get questions about this all the time, and that's how do you keep control of your sugar. Excuse me. There we go. So first there's the basic things, so let's go over those. Hi Anna. I can see some of you joining on Facebook. So we're going to go over first, and I apologize I can't post a link on the event because I'm going to be live with you guys. So first let's go over the basic things, and those things are room temperature. If your room is too hot or too cold, it can make it seem like your sugar is out of control, okay? And let's see, anyone on Facebook, let me know if you can see my working area, because I see a little feed at the bottom, but I can't tell if you guys can see my working area. So room temperature, let's go over being too hot first. So if it's too hot, then your client is going to be sweaty and your room is going to be warm, so your sugar is going to be kind of overheated to begin with, and also your hands are going to be warmer and your client's body temperature is going to be warmer. Oh, okay, you guys can't see my working area. I'll try to scoot you back. Is that better? I think you guys can see it now. I'm going to be working on my arms, and so that you guys can see that. So let me know if you can see it now. All right, so in hot temperatures, some of the solutions are that you want to make sure that you've got your powder ready. So you need to wick up sweat and then powder the skin at the same time. You don't want a lot of powder, that can actually cause trouble for you. And let's see. Sorry, on Facebook they're still having trouble seeing me. Let me try to adjust you guys again without really messing this up. Oh boy. Sorry, YouTube. Okay. Now my head's out of the shot, so let me fix Facebook really quick. Okay, I think you can see me now on Facebook. That was pretty funny. Okay, so in hot temperatures, it's really key to start with the right sugar. So you might want to add in some firm when you're learning how to sugar. Otherwise, if you don't add firm, then you may end up in the middle of your service in a sticky situation. So ideally, when you get really good at sugaring, you can kind of tell what kind of sugar you're going to need before you get started. I have sticks here because I'm going to show you. Oh, okay, now everybody can see I'm getting feedback. I'm going to show you with a stick how you can actually scoop out sugar and add it in the middle of your service. I have soft, which I usually don't work with by itself because it can get melty with a lot of clients. And I'm going to get this really soft by using a small piece, and I'm going to show you things you can practice on at home. There's things you can do with your technique and with your hands to keep your sugar cooler, and I felt like we needed to do a video to show you all of that. So the other thing that's coming up with weather is wintertime. And your sugar might seem too firm, therefore out of control, where you start working with it in your service and realize, oh boy, this sugar is really firm. So remember, you need to start with the right sugar. I recommend in the winter having soft around, and in the summer having firm around. You may even have clients that actually need one or the other at different times of the year, depending on their body. So if they have hyperhidrosis, where they sweat excessively or something like that going on, you're going to need to make sure that you add a little bit of firm, potentially even year round. Okay? And also, in the winter time, you could warm your original slightly. There is a difference between original in the summertime is very slightly firmed up, because we start getting people calling in the summer saying, hey, my sugar's too firm, or excuse me, my sugar's too soft, what's going on? And it's actually usually just the change of the season, because our formulas are very consistent and we test them, but there are slight differences from time to time because of the nature of cooking sugar. So if a sugar paste, it's ever told to you that it can be absolutely 100% perfect all the time when you're making a batch of sugar, that's not possible due to the nature of making it, which is why it's so difficult to make at home. Okay, so things you want to think about with your clients are, it could feel really out of control if they had lotion or oil on. So you want to make sure they don't have lotion or oil on, or you'll think, why can I not remove the hair? It's coming out really patchy. And lotion or oil will block your sugar. So also, you want to make sure your client is scrubbing. Sometimes people's skin is so dry that you actually get skin cells that are blocking the hair from coming out. So the skin cells get, kind of flaky, and they're kind of hardened, and they make it really difficult to remove the hair without patchy removal. I even experienced that with waxing, and that's a really important part of something that's not optional for your clients when you're teaching them how to take care of their skin at home. So you want them to scrub and then moisturize their skin. Okay, so I'm really excited to get into some exercises for you guys that you can practice at home. A lot of my new sugarists need this really bad. So this is the soft. And you need to go home when you're learning sugaring, or even if you've been doing this a year and you still don't feel confident with your sugar, you've got to practice certain exercises. Otherwise, your sugar is not going to feel like you have control of it all the time. So the first thing you need to learn, oops, that's actually my original. I was feeling it in my hand going, it doesn't feel right. So I'm going to work with soft, because soft is going to get really mushy on me fast. Sometimes if it's super cold in your room, you can actually sugar with soft. Or if they have a really large body part and their body's nice and cool and your room's nice and cool, all the more reason I should have labels on these, right? But I take these home, and I also take them into our spa rooms, and we don't label them till we test the batch numbers. So that's more like soft. It's really, really pliable, okay? I'm trying to get rid of a little bit too much sugar that I got there. And I just took that little piece that fell on the outside and touched it and moved it back into the jar. So even grabbing the sugar feels out of control to some of you to begin with. So you can warm it if you want a nice warm sugar to pull out, but we recommend trying to use it cold because that's the way we designed it. So first thing is to practice grabbing sugar, pulling up a tail. You see this nice big tail here. You want to grab more tail when you want to get more sugar. So keep pulling the tail up and grabbing more sugar. And you've got to learn how to thumb twirl your sugar so you can keep it under control. Soft is pretty soft, but not so soft that you couldn't use it, like I said. My arms are already prepped as far as putting the sugar on my skin today. Okay, so also detaching your sugar. You can either attach it to the side of your jar and cut off the tail like that, but just make sure the rest of your sugar kind of heads towards the inside of your jar. Or sometimes when the sugar is soft enough, I'll just swirl it in the middle, okay? And it comes right out. But a lot of times with the original or the firmer sugars, that's not going to happen. So to some of you, that's some of the basics that you've already done, okay? So we're going to sugar a little bit with the soft and get it really soft. And I'll show you what happens what does the sugar look like when it's starting to overheat? Because I think some of you don't even know still what that looks like, which is normal when you're learning. But the soft alone is going to get pretty soft. So you can see the softer the sugar is, the stickier it is. So what we're trying to do is just get this sugar to warm up enough that it starts getting kind of tricky to get off. And I can't pull my skin tight when I'm working on myself, unfortunately. So I feel it more. So you can see I'm sugaring a little bit here with the soft. Some people's faces I actually use soft. Oh, it's starting to get a little gooey on me. So let's start with one thing to think about, okay? Let me see if I can kind of get those out of my way. So if I set my sugar down and I'm spreading it pretty thin and I let it sit longer, or I mold twice, I'm warming up the sugar with those two things. So spreading it out is creating the body temperature is warming it. If I mold it twice, it's also warming it up more. So whether you need to warm your sugar up or cool it down, you got to keep these things in mind. And when it gets softer, you've really got to be confident with your flick. So if your sugar starts to overheat and your reaction is to mold it, you're going to overheat and be completely stuck. You're not going to get unstuck by molding. A lot of times it's better to lift off, and some of you are still practicing this. So lift off is like an airplane. And that's part of having control of your sugar. And see, I'm just laying the tail down on the rest of my sugar. So mold. If you notice your wrist is like mine, move your elbow and straighten your wrist. So mold. And a lot of times if you're molding twice, it's because someone has patchy removal. Then you lift off like an airplane. So I'm trying to get this sugar a little overheated. See how the peak of it stayed here? This is another thing about controlling sugar. As soon as you have a peak, you can't keep flicking down here. If you do, this whole strip's going to be left and it'll put undue stress on the rest of the skin. You always have to go to the peak of your sugar and then follow the sugar down. So let me see if I can get a close-up. So see how the edge gets really thin and shiny right here? See how thin and shiny it's looking. If it's starting to look wet and thin. So I went right over the top of that and flicked it off. But when you're in the beginning of sugaring, that might not be so easy. Okay? So this sugar is getting pretty warm now. It's getting a little more soupy. Okay? So another thing to practice is you're not in control of your sugar if you still hold your hand up like this in between strips or whatever you're doing during your service. Do you see what's happening to my sugar? My sugar's gone, isn't it? It's not on my fingertips anymore. Gravity, look how far down on my hand it's gone. So part of control of your sugar is using gravity to keep your sugar under control. So this I may have to stand again, tap and move. Tap and move it and see if you can get it up and off your hand. When it's spread out all over your palm, then your sugar is doing what? Just like when it's spread out all over your skin, your sugar is overheating. When it's spread out all over your hand like this, it's heating it and heating it and heating it. Double gloving and doing all this stuff sometimes teachers recommend, it's not going to fix that problem. What's going to fix that problem is moving the sugar up and off of your fingers, your hands. So some of it's going to remain there after you've spread it out, but you've got to get it back onto your fingertips. Okay? So now it's cooling. Oops, sorry, YouTube. Now it's cooling because it's off my hands. It's so off my hand that it wants to fall off, but I'm thumb twirling it just enough to keep it under control. But if you keep twirling and twirling and twirling, that'll overheat your sugar too. And the reason is, every time you twirl it, you're moving a new part of the sugar that's cooled down. Oops. You're moving a new part of the sugar that's cooler onto your warm hand. So if you're like, you know, a major twirler like this and your sugar's overheating, you're going to be in big trouble. So you could have it on your tips, your fingertips, like you're supposed to, and then you could still be in big trouble because if you're twirling it, you're still overheating it, okay? So these problems I see over and over and over again with students that are learning to sugar. Okay? So this is another problem I see when I'm teaching people, watch my ball. You can see it completely left my fingertips already. That fast. And it's moving fast down my hand. So another thing that people do when they're learning sugaring is their reaction is to go like this when this starts happening. If you're doing this, I call this the wave. Don't do this, okay? You gotta train yourself out of that. So sit on your couch, let your sugar get out of control, and you can also use your thumb and you can kind of scoop and move the sugar. Now this sugar is really kind of overheated. But do you see all the things I did to overheat this sugar? So this may get stuck, but let's take a look. See how the peaks start happening the warmer your sugar gets too. Because the sugar can separate on one side when it gets cooler. So I'm going to have to get this pretty thin and then let it warm up a little more so we can see when it gets difficult to get it off. So this is one signal that it's getting too hot. It's leaving these chunks of sugar behind. And then, like I said, another sign is when you start getting peaks, because that means the sugar got so soft that it was able to split off and leave that one little peak on the side there. So we're going to practice again. Now I'm going to cool this sugar down. So now that it's barely touching my fingertips, it's cooling. Okay? If it doesn't look like this, where it's barely touching your hand, then it's not cooling down. Most likely, if it's all over your hand, it's overheating. Okay? So I want you to take sugar and try to intentionally overheat it and practice these things. So the other thing you need for control is to perfect your thumb twirl. So this is where the wave starts happening again. When people are trying to thumb twirl, they start doing the wave. Don't do the wave. So your hand will move a little bit naturally, but you see how it's just kind of, my first few fingers are moving a little bit. But if it's really exaggerated like this, it's going to spread. See how my sugar, when I do this, how it's stretching out into a strange shape there. So you want to have a quiet twirl to keep your sugar nice and cool. So a quiet twirl is barely moving the sugar. The more the sugar starts to get into the wave, you can see how it's warming up. It warms up really quickly like that, and you still will not be able to gain control. Okay? So you have to have a quiet thumb twirl. And that's where your thumb's barely touching your sugar. See how it's a nice little ball? Now it's been cooling down for a while. So I could actually use this again. It feels firmer to me. But if your sugar remains all over your hand, it'll just get so melty. This sugar here is so soft that went down my hand that it would be very hard to remove. Okay? And then remember, if you're doing this to try to get out of a sticky situation, it's not going to happen. Can you see why? No. That's not going to work. So let's try to get some sugar back out of that. So if you smash it all over your hand, or if your thumb starts going like this, you're doing something wrong, okay? You don't want your thumb doing this movement. This is super common when people begin sugaring. So I'm starting to get some of it back here. Excuse me. See it? So it's not impossible to get yourself out of these situations when you get in them. I'm waiting for this soft to get so gooey that it's hard to flick off. Oh, there's the peak again. So, oh, there we go. So see this? If your sugar starts to do this at the end, it's a little bit too hot. You want to either cool it down or add more sugar. Excuse me, you guys. I'm gonna have to take a sip of my water here. So we're gonna add sugar now to our ball, and this is like we would in the middle of the service. Okay. So here's another thing that you will begin to get out of control sugar with. If you leave your jars open like this for long enough in humidity, then you're gonna start to feel like a little, you can even put a glove on and feel it. It's like you're ice skating across the sugar. You're gonna feel a small layer of water. If that happens to your sugar, you can even sometimes tell with a stick. So my sugar's not doing that yet. I'll try to see by the end of the video, it might not be long enough, but if one of our sugars gets a little glossy on top. And what you need to do is just remove that sugar out of the top, or use the top layer of the sugar really quickly so that there's not a bunch of extra water that the sugar pulled out of the air. So you'll get, like I said, that watery layer. What's the perfect room temperature for sugaring? Brooke says. The perfect room temperature is 70 for sugaring. If you go down to 65, then the room is going to be too cold and your sugar will get really stiff. And if you go up above 75, then your sugar is going to start to overheat a little bit. Not in a way that you can't sugar. You can sugar even if you're in an 80-degree room. But what you need to do is make sure that you have the right blend of sugar. I've done an extreme heat Brazilian and underarm, which I actually didn't know what would happen, even though I've been sugaring as long as I have. I'll do it again soon, but it was a 98-degree room, and maybe it fluctuated between 90 and 100 degrees during that video. And I had no problem doing the service besides a lot of heat and sweat coming off of their body. Okay, so you have to keep this sugar under control with your thumb while you do this. So I kind of like to keep the ability to see my sugar and thumb twirl. You're going to hold the jar with the clean heel of your hand, okay? And the key to this is you got to pull up a tail, pull up a big fat tail, and then you keep twirling on more sugar. See if you guys can all see this. So you can get a lot of sugar this way. With warm sugar, this was harder because the sugar is really soft. So then you'd have to waste gloves. So that's original. I just added. Sometimes if your client, it's the first service and they're really, really hairy, that can change your sugar. And then you need to add more sugar because your sugar became a giant hairball. Luckily our sugar is not see-through because you really could see all that hair in the clear yellowy sugars. And you know, no one really likes seeing that action when they start sugaring. So mix the two together. Don't overheat it though. Once you get it sort of mixed, then you can go right back to sugaring. So another part of your control is being aware of how hard or how much you're pressing into the skin while you're molding. So people are either light-handed or heavy-handed naturally. That's in massage, that's in our industry. People don't tend to, I should say estheticians, don't tend to know which one they are till they start practicing, and then they'll notice that they tend to have really heavy pressure during everything compared to their friend esthetician, or their pressure will be really light. So you need to find the middle ground, no matter which one you are. If your pressure's too light, your client might think you don't know what you're doing because you're hesitant. And if your pressure's too deep, you might have a client saying, they're thinking, boy, I was really just manhandled, for that service. And people don't like that, especially on their face. So one of the big problems I've had with sugaring, waxing, and facials, which is part of your control, is if an esthetician started and they were heavy-handed and they kept continuing to be heavy-handed when they started working on clients would inevitably say, gee, that person was really rough. Or, so when you're molding your sugar, you want to make sure that you're gliding it on. So you're using enough pressure. Here's your little hair. Let's say it's growing, let's say it's growing this way because my finger can bend this way. So you want to flip the hair over backwards into the sugar. So we're going the opposite direction of waxing. The hair is going to be laying down. There's the sugar still a little bit soft. So the hair, let's say on my arm, is growing this way. You want to flip that hair over so it's flipped over going in the opposite direction of its growth. And then when you flick it out, it comes out really nice and easy. Sometimes if you don't get your sugar wrapped all the way down around the base of the hair, I see this all the time when people are starting Brazilians. If your sugar is not all the way down to the skin, wrapped around the base of the hair, it's just kind of on top of the tips of the hair's not going to come out. So when you're working in a dense area of hair, you want to make sure that you are doing small sections so that your sugar is actually getting down to the base, of those hairs. Just think about that next time you're doing a first-time person with a lot of hair, and pay attention to what happens if your sugar is more on the tips of that hair. You don't want to mold into a giant section of dense hair on the Brazilian, especially in the danger zone. I tried to draw a little picture of that, but it was almost too graphic, so I've got to find a way to draw something so I can show you guys a picture of where the danger zone is. And you want to work in small sections on a Brazilian in the dense hair so that the sugar gets a chance to actually get down to the base of the hair and flip the hair around, in your sugar. Another thing that comes up when people are learning is, what do they do if they need to change their glove? I actually didn't put my powder up here. So you lay your sugar down. My hand's got a little bit of sweat going. So this is another control thing though. This hand has a tiny bit of sweat, and you can see how the glove's not going anywhere. If you've done facials or waxing for years, you'll understand exactly why that happens. Okay. Now this hand dried off a little bit, okay? So you can always put your sugar down, but remember it's warming up the longer you leave it there. And then you can come back to that sugar. So I don't recommend switching hands when you're sugaring, the only reason I know how to do this is because I work on my own arms and that kind of thing sometimes. Okay, but there's more hair over here, so we can keep sugaring. So another thing that's going to make you feel out of control is if you don't go down into position 2. I can't tell you how many students see this sugar is getting sticky, and this is my bad hand. So this hand's more like a beginner hand. I'm not right-handed with sugaring, but I can still control my sugar, which should be encouraging to those of you that have been struggling. If I can control my sugar with my right hand, then you guys can practice and get your sugar under control. Okay. So make sure you cross over your last section a little bit and you go down into position 2. And you can kind of roll to do that, so you can roll to the side a little bit to flick too. But when I see people flicking from straight up, it works on arms and legs and certain body parts, and then it stops working when you get to the small areas. If you don't use the right engineering, is what I like to call it, where you go from step 1, where you're straight up, down flat, to step 2, which we call pull back, and then step 3, we flick. But remember to keep your wrist and your hand relaxed while you're working with the sugar. So if your sugar is too stiff and you're fighting it and it's not molding very easily, then you need to mix in a slightly less firm sugar, like the soft, or let's say you work with firm. I do have some places that there's extreme humidity and they work with a lot of firm, so that can happen. So 1, 2, 3, and remember to flick parallel. Now this is my bad hand. So with this hand, it feels easier to me to kind of roll to the side and flick, as long as you're going almost flat. But beginning sugarists make this mistake. They go flat and then they're thinking about what they're about to do, and I'm thinking, uh-oh, and then they go to flick. How many of you have had that happen? I went to flick and it just didn't go anywhere, right? Because everything on my hand molded in when I laid my hand down for too long. And if you're flicking well, your sugar will fling kind of onto the back of your hand. So you can take your hand where there's no hair and just kind of scoop the sugar off the back of your hand and get most of it back onto the front. So that's another trick. I know this is a lot of information, but try to go through this video multiple times and practice this stuff at home. You'll feel so much better when you're in the middle of a service and you go, oh, I know what just happened. I laid my hand down too long and the sugar molded back into the skin. So these things should become no-brainers where you don't have to think about them anymore because you programmed it all in. When we do this part of the arm, we have the client put their arm up like this, and the sugar is getting real soft again. This is actually kind of the consistency I like to work with. I like my sugar a little bit stickier, especially on people with difficult hair, because it's going to grip with less molding onto the hair better if it's a little stickier. But too sticky, you know, could be a disaster. So you can see even with this hand, I barely ever use this hand, only when I'm working on myself, like once a month, so let's see. So I've done it, a good amount of times with this hand, but it's only certain areas. And look how much control, because it's the same things I was showing you with my sugaring hand that I'm doing with this hand. So these basic little tips can make even a beginner get really in control of their sugar. Ooh, there's a lot of fuzz right there. Hidden fuzz. Okay, so because we added original, we're not having very much trouble. Somebody asked a little while ago what kind of gloves these are. These are nitrile. This box is smashed. This is like my home box that gets moved all over. So, this is the Duraskin, and we carry these on my website in the supplies section, okay? Alright, so my little sugar ball, this is about half pretty warm soft and half original, but it's still under control and it's not overheating even on my right hand, which I'm not right-handed. So an exercise to practice, let me see where you guys can see this, is let me put the sugar more on my hand, okay? And tap and move. I'm gonna have to stand up because I can't turn my hand. The chair isn't giving you a very clear view. Okay? Alright. So tap and move, and I want you guys to practice tapping and moving the sugar. See what it's doing? I can even get those little strings back in a ball. That one's trying to escape. Tap and move it until you drop it off your hand. Okay? That's a good way to practice to get more control of your sugar. Of course, when you drop it off your hand, this went on my other gloves here and it's molding its way into the sugar. And sugaring, this is not my well-practiced hand, but it's gonna look a little bit messy, but it's a controlled mess. It's not everywhere, it's not all over, it's not on me, it's on my garbage area where it's supposed to be, and it's on my glove where it's